Yeah, so if you're just plugging into this video, we'd like to do a recap of every episode. It's about 25 minutes long. And we'd like to take that, cut it out as its own video for people who are just trying to know what happened in this episode. So if you're watching that video right now, down in the episode description, we have the whole breakdown of our thoughts, favorite theories, all that stuff. Again, it's down in the description of the episode below. But having said that, let's talk about what happened in episode 10 of campaign 3 of Critical Role. Now, if you remember, what happened last week was Chetney found himself in Vali Dirtrana, sort of this business commissioner, in that person's office, and overheard a conversation with Vali and a person by the name of Ira down some dark staircase that was behind a bookshelf. Vali came up and was looking for Chetney, who was invisible, and Chetney jumped out of a window to escape, and that's where the episode picks up. So the episode picks up with Chetney, and just to quote Travis, doing his gnome run, and Vali looks out the window, and despite the invisibility, is able to, I guess because of the rain, somewhat spot Chetney, and jumps out the window and makes his chase after Chetney. The party away actually sees this happening, and everybody immediately is like, what do we do? We got to help Chetney. They have all sorts of ideas, but they also don't want to just, one, they don't want to kill Vali, and two, they also don't want to implicate the entire group by helping Chetney. So what they eventually decide to do is Imogen actually approaches Vali, who, by the way, is trying to swipe at Chetney, who's dodging these blade swipes, and cast calm emotions on him to try to calm him down, and basically be like a person who's like out in the courtyard being like, oh, hey, Vali, are you okay? Like, what's going on? Vali fails the DC on this, and so calm emotions works. And Imogen's like, hey, like, we were coming to see you. Like, we left a note. Like, did you get it? And he's like, what? No, like, I'm very busy. Like, what's going on? And Chetney then takes that moment to basically be like, I'm a spirit. Let me be free. I was killed in your office years ago. Basically saying like, hey, I'm just a ghost that's in your office. And then Chetney like books it while invisible. And Imogen plays off this and is like, what was that? Like, oh my gosh. And basically tricks Vali into believing that, hey, like, is this place haunted? Like, did you know this place was haunted? And Vali's like, no, it's not haunted, but wait, is it haunted? Basically ends up what happening is calms him down enough where he's just like, whatever, this was nuts. I need to talk to some people and like figure out what the heck just happened tonight. So he makes his way. The situation is defused, and the party meets back up with Chetney, who Chetney basically reveals all the things that he read in the journal about the Nightmare King, and also basically just informs him about Ira and says, hey, I think maybe Gurge might be down there. I think they might have Gurge. So the party's like, well, this is too hot a scene for us to like come back and break in. But a couple of great points are made of, if Ira or Vali are now aware that someone is aware of their operation, that they might move Gurge or reset up shop elsewhere. Sorry, I'm stifling a sneeze like mid description here.
Let it out if you need to.
So they're like, we just got to go tonight. Like, we got to go tonight. But Imogen and Laudna and Fern are like, oh, we can't go tonight. We have our date with Pretty. And they're like, okay, well, fine. So here's what they decide to do. The three of them will go on their date with Pretty. Meanwhile, Dorian, Chetney, and Orem will sort of case the place and see like what the, if there's any kind of like investigation going on or like more wardens or anything like that, kind of get an idea of the best route to enter. And then Ashton's like, hey, if we're all splitting up, this would be a good time to go follow up with that thing I said I needed to take care of by myself with basically JH. Like, now would be a good time to go do that. So they all split up. Orem, Chetney, and Dorian, they do end up sticking around the courtyard area, and they notice like some wardens who are inspecting the area. They actually notice a warden who seems to be sort of like a more elite warden or like a head warden. who it's like they're collecting evidence in the office. And meanwhile, they had earlier said, hey, whenever we want to meet back up at the Spire by Fire, we'll just use our sending stone. And Dorian had actually mentioned, like, oh, about that, I gave it to my brother. And a couple of the party members are like, ah, good one. And he's like, no, but really. And Ashton's like, I'm not just mad. Or he says, like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. But he's like, and I'm also mad, or something like that. But like while they're casing the joint, Orm's like, hey man, like, I get it. It's your brother. Like, don't sweat it. It's no big deal. And then also, whenever they're done casing the place, Chetney's actually been hanging back at the gondola. And in talking with Chetney, Dorian basically says, like, hey, like, we're glad you're okay. Like, we wouldn't want something to happen to you. And he's like, well, why do you care? And he's like, well, because you're one of us now. Like, you're one of our friends. And this is a really important moment because it's like from this moment on that now Chetney, who's been really obstinate towards Dorian, he has like a tear in his eye. And then actually later, when they're talking later, he's like, you know, thanks, friend, and like puts his hand like on Dorian's shoulder, or maybe vice versa. I can't remember, but it's kind of a cool little bro moment that happens between the two of them. Over at the date with Pretty, they arrive at the Soot and Swill, and Pretty's waiting for the three of them to show up. They come in, and Pretty immediately is like, see, and apparently had made bets with everyone at the tavern that they weren't really going to show up. So everyone, like, you know, I guess showers him with money. And I forgot to mention that FCG also, he's been like, yeah, I don't know what a date is like. So he had offered to come and sort of chaperone, and they're like, yeah, come on. So he's there as well. The three ladies sit down with Pretty. He gives each of them a present, and it's like different vegetables that Pretty has like taken out of the kitchen and sort of like carved, or, you know, did a little art spin on it to make it kind of a cool thing. Like one of them's two pumpkins stacked together. One of them is a cauliflower that's been like cut into like a spiral, almost like a flower. And then one's an artichoke that's like just a beautiful fresh artichoke.
Delicious.
And and then Lada, by the way, is like, oh, I didn't even realize we should give you a gift. And has a tankard basically full of trash and like chicken bones and like maggots. And she's like, I hope this is okay. But so they basically have their date. And the whole time it's, you know, they're drinking together, they're talking, and they eventually make their way over to the what's the name of the
Dreamscape Theater?
The Dreamscape Theater, right? Because they have their lifetime passes. Which I won't spoil what happens after that. But they eventually do make their way over to there. And then Ashton makes his way to the Lucent Spire, the one spire we haven't seen yet, but we know is like where the nobles reside, and makes his way up to this rainy house, and basically knocks on a door, and a person answers it, an older, I think it was an elf, who Ashton basically says, or knocks and says, hey, nobody's here. And if you remember the group that he ran with before, in his backstory, they were called the Nobodies. And he's welcomed in. So that's the first half of the show.
Yeah. And just picking right up there, if I could find my spot. Oh yeah, okay. So and as Ashton's walking in, there are these two like sentry golems that are kind of like tracking his every movement. And Gianna Hexam, who we find this is her house, the Hexam Manor, greets him and basically, you know, starts eating cheese like a, you know, pompous person would.
Yeah.
And
cliche noble for sure.
Exactly. And she's basically like, you know, I have an idea, something that may even be able to erase your debt if things go well. And she basically, Ashton's like, okay, tell me more. And she basically reveals that she has entered into this like wager basically with a colleague of hers, Avon Hydroga, who was making fun of her because apparently recently she was robbed, like somebody broke into her house or something. We don't have the full context there, but she says this Avon Hydroga person was, you know, taunting her for that, saying like no one could ever get through my defenses. And so thus this wager kind of came up between them. which is basically they're gonna each try to steal something from the other, and like whoever wins, gets a prize. Um,
It's a rat
so
race of sorts.
yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
Gianna's like, I know you're running with a new crew. Do you think your crew would be up for this type of job, or do I need to like hire some outside people to do this? And Ashton says, you know what, we're kind of doing some things right now, but I think we could handle this. And he's like, I'm surprised though because I thought you were calling me to this meeting because of your what's it called, your carriage or whatever it is that was robbed
Yeah.
with the initials JH on it, which we now know for certain that this is the same JH. And she's like, how'd you know about that? And he's like, I'm close to it. I have, I don't reveal my sources, but I do want you to know that the person you're after for that is not who you should be going after. And referring to Dorian's brother, who has this
Right.
$20,000 bounty on his head. And, but she's like, well, do you have any proof of this? And he's like, not yet. And so, really, not much else to go on there, at least at this juncture. But he does let her know that, hey, for what it's worth, you're going after the wrong person there. And she's like, yeah, well, I have more experienced people handling that. What I want you for is this wager thing. And she's like, if you guys accept, you'll have to travel to the Heartmoor, and that is where all the details of this wager will be given. That's where you'll be told like what you're trying to steal and yada yada yada. And there's a rival troop, if you will, that will be, I guess, attempting to steal something from Gianna. And we're told that Mistress Isha Sabonis, I think is the name, is the one sponsoring the rival troop. And she's like, if you guys do this, you'll be paid, of course, except for the party will be paid, of course, but you,
Right.
Ashton, will not be paid, but his debt will more than likely be cleared.
Yeah.
Um, so he's like, okay, I'll bring this information to my friends. And he's like, can I tell them about you? And she's like, yeah, this is above the board. Like, feel free to tell them about me. And he's like, okay, great. But before he leaves, he asks if she knows anything about the Nightmare King. And unfortunately, she is not familiar with that name. But then Ashton does fill her in on their recent goings on. So he fills her in about the mimic at the theater and also their encounter with Vali. And she's like, whoa, whoa, y'all are messing with Vali. Like, he's very well connected. Like, you need to,
Yeah. Be
watch
careful.
what you're doing. And
Yeah.
and Ashton says, yeah, he's into some super dark shit. And she's like, oh, what? And he's like, well, we don't know yet, but I'll let you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so anyway, Ashton then takes his leave, and we then basically cut to the end of the date with Pretty and the girls, and FCG. They're leaving the Dreamscape Theater, and Pretty is actually giving like a very detailed and thoughtful review of the show. Like he's much more intelligent than I think a lot of us gave him credit for.
Right.
And he after he does that, he basically stops and I think he even kneels down to like get on their level, and he's like, ladies, tonight was such an unexpected pleasure, but we're just different people. And it's like, it's not
Right.
you, it's me kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um so he tells them it's not going to work out romantically, but he still wants to be friends, and he cares for them deeply. He's invested in their happiness, and he's like, when you do find that special someone, he's like, come to the restaurant. I'd love to cook you guys a meal. And then he takes his leave.
I think he
Then,
says he's gonna go work on his novel
oh
or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, I think he does.
Yeah.
And so then FCG and the girls talk a little bit about it, and FCG's basically like, it was kind of boring, but I
Yeah.
learned I learned a
This
little
date
bit.
sucked.
Yeah. And so then basically that whole group heads back to the Spire by Fire, which is where everyone said they were going to meet up after they, do their own things. Which during this time, Dorian, Chetney, and Oram, like Blake mentioned, had kind of been scouting Vali's office to see, what the security level was, and just see what if trying to get more information so they could make a solid plan. And basically, the only thing they learn is that in the morning he's going to move all of his stuff and just basically not use that office anymore.
Right. I forgot to
Um,
mention that. Yeah.
So then the three of them also head back to the Spire by Fire, and so now everyone's back, and they're basically all filling each other in on their own events of the night. And Ashton lets everybody know about this job offer they have of this wager. And the party is interested, especially considering the connection with Dorian's brother and Gianna. They're like, maybe if we do this job, we can kind of ingratiate ourselves with her and maybe get some heat off of Cyrus. But then the party asks, like, Ashton, what's your history with Gianna? And he basically tells them about his old crew, the Nobodies, were on this mission to basically rob her, and they got caught. And well, they didn't get caught actually, but things went to shit. Ashton got really hurt, and everyone else skipped town. But because Ashton was hurt, he was still in town. Gianna found out it was him, and basically, instead of turning him into the authorities, was like, "Hey, how about you just work off this debt for me?" And that's kind of how their relationship started. And he also reveals that that is also how he got that big injury that starts on his head and kind of goes down his arm, is when he was robbing Gianna in her house. He was up on a high floor, and he says that the only thing he remembers is like a blast of magic energy hitting him, and then he like crashes through a window and fell. And he says he just woke up in Milo's or not office, but Milo's place.
Yeah, like a lab or whatever.
Who had just used whatever they could to fix him, because Milo's not a healer, doesn't have healing magic, but they just use their tinkering skills, and that's why he's got like the glass and the gold that are kind of patching him up. And the party asks, like, are you mad at your old crew for leaving you like that? And Ashton just says, no, I understand. Like, I would have done the same thing. If I see him again, might be a couple punches thrown, but then that'll be the end of it. And they're like, oh, okay. So then they're like, so this wager that Gianna wants to do, like, hire us for, like, when is that? And he's like, well, it's not tonight, so we don't need to worry about that tonight. Like, let's focus on this Gurge Chetney thing. So they're like, okay, yeah, what are we going to do about that? So they ultimately decide, since everything's going to be moving in the morning, tonight is their best chance. And so they head back toward the moon tower to see if they can sneak back in there and go check out that hidden room behind the bookcase that Chetney found. So they make their way there, and there's a few guards kind of roaming around the outside of this courtyard. And one of them takes notice of this big group, and he walks over and is like, yeah, what are you guys doing here? You guys, it's late. You guys need to go home. And they play it off by being like, oh, we heard there were like these ghost attacks earlier, like some cursed spirits were out. Yeah. And they ask him, have you ever like heard anything or seen anything like that? And he says, you know what? A lot of nights I'm out here hearing voices. And he says that there was like a massacre or something around these parts like 35 years ago, and thinks that like, maybe some of those spirits were still lingering. And he's like, okay, but you guys need to go home. So he kind of like turns around and is continuing his patrol. And Laudna decides to cast Silent Image of like this ghost, like kind of peering out of a wall, like grabbing for him. And at the same time, she casts Message into his brain and just says like, let me free. And the guard actually rolls a natural 1 on this to discern if it's an illusion. So he freaks out, like drops his spear and just books it out of there.
I think Matt said he like leaves the tower entirely, like the like the spire, and like leaves the district. Like,
yeah, he's just leaving Drusar.
Yeah, he leaves Marquette. He's out of there.
So now that they've got like the coast, at least the immediate coast is clear, they all jump over this wall and actually get inside of the courtyard where the moon tower is. And Orum's kind of taking point, trying to make sure that nobody gets seen. And it is still raining, and it's pitch black night as well, obviously. And they do notice they can't like see guards, but they can see their magical torches that they are holding, so they can kind of see these lights like bobbing around different places. And basically they're just darting like from hedge to hedge, trying to stay hidden. And this actually reminded me of an Ocarina of Time, where you're like young Link trying to break into the castle to see Zelda.
Yeah.
I digress.
We won't tell
Anyway,
you what happens there, by the way. I'm just kidding.
uh,
Spoiler alert.
so as they're diving between the hedges, one of the guards actually comes up close to them. It doesn't see them yet. So Lana decides to basically do the same thing. She casts another illusion, this time of this like creepy little flower girl in all white, who
I
has
think of
like,
the girl from The Ring is basically what
yeah,
I envisioned.
yeah, exactly that. I feel like was what she was going for. And like she has like voids for eyes, and like the bottom half of her jaw was just like gone and
Yeah,
just like,
right.
and so she has that creature kind of reach out toward this guard, and he just passes out, passes out immediately from fear. Um, so now that they have this coast clear as well, they make their way all the way to the moon tower, sneak back up in through the broken window that Chetney jumped out of, and all safely get into the office. Then Chetney disarms a trap and quickly is able to throw the switch that opens the bookcase, and he immediately goes in there and sees what he can see. Or actually, he's just seeing what he can hear and what he can notice from like the top of the top of the staircase. And he's told that he hears like this kind of gleeful humming, but also this like arcing of energy, like pulsating kind of sporadically.
Right.
And so he's curious, and he kind of takes a few more steps down just to see like the first things he can see. And he comes to this chamber that we're told kind of looks like a set of holding cells, and there's a big table in the center with a lot of like alchemical reagents and stuff on it, some boxes scattered about, and also this like weird contraption that's about 10 feet tall and has got lots of like metal rods and is glowing blue. And also there is a tall humanoid figure that's like 7 or 8 feet tall, that is very thin and lithe, and is wearing this long black coat with the many tails, and they have like really elongated limbs, and he's like he just looks like wrong how he's
Yeah.
situated. And Chetney can see that this person is the one humming and kind of going back and forth between these things, and he's also holding, I think, some blue gem.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
and Chetney then also hears another voice, which he recognizes to be Gurge. And Gurge is asking what this creepy figure, he's like, "What the hell do you want with us, man?" And this figure says that, your gift needs to be shared with the world. But I have more pressing matters to attend to right now. And they like kind of turn around and are walking back between this contraption and other things in the room. So Chetney kind of fills in Imogen with what he's seeing telepathically. And everyone's like, okay, what the hell? And so Chetney then goes further down, since the figure has turned around and kind of walked away from him, just to see even more what he can see when he goes into the room. And when he does this, he can now see Gurge, and he looks very rough. And this information is getting relayed, and so the rest of the party's like, okay, like we're coming down too. And so as everyone starts to come down, the figure turns around and is like, oh, I wasn't expecting guests, but tonight's just going to get more interesting. And since he turned around, we can see that he has no eyebrows and eyes with no irises, no nose, and a grin that Matt describes as like a jack-o'-lantern that stretches all the way to his ears. And that's where the session ends.
No big deal, right? Yeah, great job. Yeah, that's what happened in episode 10 of Campaign 3. And if you made it this far, you want to hear our reactions and you're watching just the recap video, again, click the link below and we'll dive right in. So